Welcome back. We're going to now discuss something that's plain, just fun, and you can do this as a trick the next time you go out to eat with your parents, and you will surprise them and they'll say, "Wow, did you know that?" But before we get to that, here's what I'd like for you to do. I'd like for you to think about how we multiply times 10. So for example, 5 times 10. I think most of us know. Bring that 5 over in our shortcut method because we love to multiply times 10. Bring that 0 on top of the other number at the end in the ones place, and there you go, 50. And that's helpful when we get to bigger numbers like 265 times 10. We take the other number we're multiplying times 10, we write it down, 265, and then we take our 0 and add it to the end. So 2,650. We could do those quickly. We could do those in our head. But what happens if we have a number, let's say, like 5 times 1/10? Now notice this is a 1 and a 5, and you heard me say tenth. Well, it's a lot like multiplying times a 10 with a 0. It's not nearly as hard as what you might think. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 5 times 1 and then put my decimal in front now. Now, that will make sense here in just a minute. But let's try one more here. Let's say 25 times 1/10. That's going to be its times 1. 25 times 1. And on this one, our decimal would have been here after the 5. Instead, we're going to move it in front of the 5. So it's going to be 2.5. Now, you need to think what I just did. All I simply did was took the number 25, because basically in the number 25, if there's no decimal in the whole number, it's right here at the end. That's still the number 25. I'm going to take it and I'm going to move that decimal right here. So 2.5 or 2 5/10. Okay, with that in mind, here is where the fun begins. Now, most people would say that the going rate for a tip, let's say you go out to eat in a restaurant like Applebee's or Red Lobster or wherever you go out to eat, and all of a sudden you get a bill at the end, and we'll say it's $36.76. And your mom or dad says, "Oh, how much do I have to tip?" Well, normally, standard rate would be 15% of whatever your total was, of the total. 15%, we'll say that's times total. And that of the total, 15% of that, you have to add on to your total, and that's a tip amount. Well, nowadays, I've heard a lot of people say that really you should tip 20%. Well, that's really up to, it's really up to whoever's there paying, of course. But either way, we can still figure out $36.76. We can figure out 15% of that. The first thing I want to do is solve 10% of the total. Once I find 10% of the total, I will be ready to figure out the rest. And just so we're clear, 10% is the same thing as 1/10 or 0.1. Now, earlier we talked about how to multiply times 0.1 or 1/10. These are all the same thing. They're all just different ways of writing the same thing. All right, this is where the magic happens. $36.76. Let's take a look, and let's first think of, now we're gonna try to tip this because they were such a good server. We're gonna tip them 20%. So we need to figure out what 20% of $36.76. Now, in my head, I can't do that very quickly, but I can do 10% of $36.76 because it's the same thing as 0.1 or 1/10 times $36.76. All I need to do is take this decimal and sneak it right over here in front. Anytime you're multiplying times 1/10 or 0.1, you move that decimal one place to the left. So if I move that decimal, it would now be between 3 and the 6 and 76. Now, we do know that there's no such thing as 6/10 of a cent. This would be the pennies right here, the dimes, and the dollars. This isn't, but we could round that up if we need to. But hold on. We are at 10%. So that means 10% of $36.76 is $3.67. Or if we round it up, $3.68. Now, in order to get to 20%, there's one thing we notice about 10 and 20. 10 is times 2 of 10 times 2 equals 20, or just double. Whatever you have, double it. So let's just, for making it very easy, let's say this is $3.50. If we double that, we would have $3.50 plus $3.50. We would have $7 after you do the math there. So a very good tip for that person that served you would be about, an estimate would be about $7. Now, if we wanted to find exactly, we could do $3.68 plus $3.68, and we would end up with $7.36. Now, there was a lot going on that last page, so let's do another quick one here. And we're going to say, we'll just throw out a number. Let's say we went to a real fancy place and it was $43.94 total was our total. We had to figure out 20% of that. $43.94. Well, let's find 10%. Remember, when we multiply times 10%, simply move your decimal one place to the left. I need to take it, it's right here between the 9 and the 3, and let's move it between the 4 and the 3. So it's going to be 4.394. We can actually get rid of that because it doesn't make this 9 round up. Now we can take $4.39 and double it, and we have $8.78 to be exact. So 20% of $43.94 is $8. So the tip for that person should be $8.78. So that's a quick way to find the tip for 20%. Now let's move on to 15% because that's the typical rate of, and we're just going to make this one simple. We're going to say it's $20 that our final bill was, and we need to figure out 15% of $20. Well, again, let's start with 10. And I know that 10 is actually, if I cannot double it, but I can cut 10 in half and give it another 5%. So whatever I find for 10, if I take half of what I have for 10, that could be my 5%, and then combine those. So let's find, first of all, if I have $20, remember if I multiply times 10%, I'm going to move it to the left one place. It's going to be $2. with a bunch of zeros there. And I do know that's going here, but I think I can find half of 10% because 5 right here is half of 10%. So half of 2 would be 1. So 2 plus 1 is going to be $3. That means 15% of $20 would be $3. Again, I really didn't do any math. I was simply just moving some decimals, and I did have to figure out half of 2 and then add those together. Now, next time you go out to eat with your parents, make sure you do this quickly in your mind. Look at this video a few times, and sure enough, you'll be able to really impress them. So until next time, it's a beautiful day in this neighborhood. We'll see you next. 1